Hey, how are you? This is Beyond Organic Wine, and I'm Adam Huss. And today I am talking about something that is very personal to me because I lived through it this year in a vineyard here in California, a vole infestation. And how do you deal with that? Well, I didn't know at the beginning of the year, and now I know a lot more about voles. And I'm going to go through this quickly. There's obviously a lot of things that could be added to this, but I just want to hit the highlights because I think it's really important information, will be very useful to you if you ever experience this, and could actually save your entire vineyard if you follow these helpful things that I learned by losing almost half the vineyard this year. It wasn't my vineyard, and the count is still out, but yeah, basically 50% of a 25-acre vineyard was destroyed by girdling from voles, which is catastrophic. I mean, from any standpoint, emotionally, ecologically, economically, from a business standpoint, I mean, that's a deal breaker. That's an ender of your business. So these little things can really mess you up, and they are not predictable. They come in cycles that are based on the climate, really. When conditions are right, what happened this year was we had several years of extreme drought, which greatly decreased predator populations. And then over the last 2 winters here in California, we had decent rain. Actually, 2 winters ago, we had a lot of rain, and this past winter, we had decent rain. And that combination of the rain bringing lots of food and habitat and forage, combined with really low predator populations, gave the perfect conditions for voles to explode their populations. And when I say explode, I mean, it's unreal if you haven't been through it. There just are so many voles, they're eating everything. And in California, what happens is when the dormant season comes, which is our summer, so after May, when things start browning and dying and going dormant, the only thing that's alive and watered are your irrigated crops, your grapevines or your orchard. And now the voles are starving, so they come for your trees and vines, and they come hard, and they breed, they gestate and can give birth every 3 weeks. They can nurse while they're gestating, and the day that they give birth, they can mate again and start that 3-week cycle, and they reach sexual maturity in 4 to 6 weeks. So they are the poster children. These are voles. They're the poster children for exponential population growth. But as it turns out, when there's high vole populations, there's high every other kind of ground rodent population. There were so many gophers and ground squirrels on the land where I was farming grapes this year. It was a lot of work, and we spent a lot of time trapping and killing a lot of these rodents, all to no avail. As I said, we lost half the vineyard, and all of our work and resources were really wasted because we didn't really put a dent in the populations to the extent that we saved the vines. And so I've done a lot of thinking about this, I've done a lot of interviewing about this, and I think the first thing that we have to think about, as you saw, number one on this, what is our role in creating the conditions for a vole infestation or any kind of ground rodent problem to happen? You can't have a vole infestation in a vineyard or orchard if you don't have a vineyard or orchard. In other words, we are going into an ecosystem and putting in vines and trees and then irrigating them to keep them alive. At least that's what we're doing here in the West, the US. Many other places where vines are grown, that is also the case, and often where orchard trees are grown, that's also the case. And then we're blaming the rodents who are coming for those, again, as I say, during the dormant season when everything's dead except for those trees and vines that we irrigate. So it's not their fault. They're not evil creatures who are trying to hurt us. They are living out their biological imperatives. They're hungry, and they want the nutrition and moisture that's in those plants that we have put into their home, essentially. I mean, it's our home too, and So we have to think about being smarter about what we're doing and really observing where we're installing our orchards and vineyards. Do they belong there? These are big questions, because I think to start with, you can't be regenerative. I'm approaching this from a regenerative standpoint, as a regenerative wine grower, regenerative farmer. If you are trying to do that, you better first start ecologically. You better first observe your land and make sure that you are growing in a way that meshes with the environment, that is actually in concert with what the land already wants to do. So in our case here in California, I'll just use where I was as an example, there are no vines naturally. I mean, this would be a grassland, essentially, with some savanna in certain areas where there's enough moisture on the north sides of slopes, or in the more fertile and wetter valleys and areas like that, where there are rivers and streams. But otherwise, it's just a grassland. It doesn't support vines, it doesn't support perennial crops other than sages and things like that. And so when you go and put vines into that, you're asking for trouble, especially if you look around and you see tons of signs of gophers and ground squirrels and voles. Then you go plant in that, well, maybe you just shouldn't. I mean, maybe you should think about a different crop. Maybe you should just be grazing animals there. Maybe you should be doing cactus there instead of vines and things like that. Something that the voles aren't interested in eating, or that the other squirrels aren't interested in eating, and that can be established in ways that they're not going to hurt. So you got to think ecologically. And number two, what are they trying to tell you? So what is the message of the messengers? I think of these things like we think of weeds as a plant out of place, but a weed really tells you a lot about what's going on in the soil. And we can think of these animals or anything like this that causes us problems as a messenger. Like, what is it trying to convey to us? Like, what is it telling us about the ecosystem, about our behavior in that ecosystem? That's what we should be thinking about. What is the message from the messengers? Not like, how do we get rid of the messengers? The messengers are just the messengers. They're just holding a mirror up to us in our farming to let us know what we're doing. And if we just ignore that, we're going to continue to repeat those cycles of mistakes and conflict, and we will never come to a real solution. We'll never regenerate that land. We'll just constantly be in a battle state of trying to kill these things that are really just living out their lives and letting us know that we've created this amazing place for them to live. This is one of the interesting things about regenerative farming, regenerative wine growing in general, which is when we create an ecosystem that we try to enhance the health, we try to we try to not till and help to encourage soil health. We don't want to mow, we want to leave living things. We actually create the perfect conditions for these animals to exist. We're incentivizing biodiversity, which is great, but that biodiversity increases our farming risks. So by farming according to our regenerative values, we actually increase our farming risks. And that is a really interesting paradox that I think is our job to solve as farmers, as regenerative farmers. So that's one of the main, uh-oh, I hear my cat. He's coming for me. He hears my voice. So I want to start with what not to do, or what doesn't work. There's a lot of things that don't work, but number one, trying to completely eradicate all of these animals doesn't work. As I said, we tried this year. I killed hundreds of rodents this year, and at the end there were still hundreds of rodents. Hey, you're in the way. Come here. Get over here. There were still hundreds of rodents. This guy's useless at rodent hunting. He's more of a snuggle butt. Hi. So we tried killing this year, and not only was it really hard to do, it was hard work, and it was hard emotionally for all of us who were doing it. It didn't work. And if it had worked, would we have really left that land a better place if we could have just eliminated all of the lives that threatened our plants? I mean, as I said, they don't mean any harm. They're telling us stuff. So if we could have waved a magic wand and just been like, poof, they're gone, what would have been the downstream effects of that? We don't know. Like, we don't know until we do that. We don't know how important these little lives are to an ecosystem until we remove them. And it's it's a big mistake to just go charging in and think you can eliminate something and everything's going to be okay. A couple things that are off the table for me in any kind of farming, wine growing or otherwise, are poisons and herbicides. This is what the vast majority of farming uses, of agriculture around the world uses. They basically create a dead zone in their agriculture other than their plants that their cash crop. So they kill everything else. They basically put out tons of poison, tons of herbicide, so you got no plants, you got nothing there. The problem is these all have huge downstream impacts on the ecosystem. Raptors will eat the poisoned rodents and then they will die, and you're just messing up so many things downstream when you're using poisons and herbicides, which ultimately affects the health of everybody on this planet. The other thing you should not do, so don't try to completely eradicate, don't do herbicides and poisons. Don't wait or use partial or individual solutions. Waiting, as I mentioned, because these animals have such big exponential population growth potential, just allows time for them to explode and take over, and then it's really hard to get rid of them once you have thousands and thousands of these critters living in your vineyard or orchard. It becomes a real nightmare. And don't just try one thing. You've heard like, oh, I should do this, I'll try that. Or don't just do a test in a couple rows. When you see voles, from my experience, act quickly and act extensively across your entire vineyard or orchard. Do not wait, go big. Because once you see them, they're there, and like I said, it's only a matter of time till they're there in the thousands. So the best thing that you can do is prevention. And one of the best ways to prevent is when you plant your perennial crops. So at planting, you want to plant into wire mesh baskets that are 1/2 inch maximum, which is about 10 millimeters, is it? No, 5 millimeter. 5 millimeter spacing on the mesh is about the maximum that you want. Around the roots and up the trunk, 30 to 50 centimeters, which is 1 foot to 18 inches approximately. You also want to use trunk protectors. This is often at planting as well, which is metal trunk protectors. Plastic do not work. I will maybe put in a couple pictures into this video of all the plastic trunk protectors we had this year that were just absolutely chewed completely to nothing by the voles. I mean, it was crazy. They chewed right through and into, and then they of course went to the vines, but plastic did not stop them. So metal vole guards or trunk protectors or grow tubes, you need to actually probably make them, or I don't know that anybody's making metal ones, but you can maybe use that wire mesh as a trunk protector as well, or paint mixed with sand spread over it. I've heard is really effective as well. We didn't try that this year, but I've heard from multiple people that is a texture that they don't like, and so they will avoid it. Having said that, if it's not metal, if it's not something they actually can't chew through, I wouldn't trust that except as prevention. But when they get really hungry, like if you have a high population of hungry rodents, I'm very doubtful that anything other than like things that they literally cannot chew through will stop them. So I would rely on multiple things in this way. One other thing that not a lot of people do, but I think is a good idea, is a gopher fence. The cost of a gopher fence can be probably $10,000 to $15,000 around a 25-acre vineyard, which is where I did the calculations for. That's buried 3.5 feet deep, and then it's about 2.5 feet above ground as well. And you can even put an electric strand across the top to keep out both gophers and squirrels. That squirrels are the ones that would climb over. that cost of, let's say it's $15,000, is significantly less than the amount of cost that you will have in just labor doing all the trapping and killing of gophers and squirrels throughout 1 year in a 25-acre vineyard. So even though it costs a lot up front, you will save money in the long term, and then it will theoretically last for 10 years, and that cost will more than pay off itself. Also, if you consider how much it would cost to, if you're thinking about the cost of putting metal baskets and things like that around all of your plants at planting, and thinking how much that's going to add, like $1 to $2 extra to your per plant cost at planting. I mean, just think about replanting half your vineyard, and I think that $1 to $2 will be very much worth it. So we're still in prevention. First thing is protection. So I've just mentioned a few ways you can protect. The other thing is, and this is kind of thinking outside the box a little bit, emulating plants. So if you emulate plants don't plant individual seeds and then protect it with all of their resources. They aren't precious about their babies. They scatter thousands of seeds into the soil, knowing, well, I don't know if they know, but because the selection of those seeds will result in only a few of them growing. Only just a handful out of thousands will actually survive to maturity, to reproductive maturity. If we started thinking more that way, what would our vineyards and orchards look like? How could we build a system that was overplanted so that things could die, and that would be part of our plan, that would be part of our ecological succession plan, who are so adorable, for that vineyard or orchard? This is definitely a different way of thinking about it. It's not easy to think about how you would manage that, but I think we need to start thinking that way if we want to be regenerative in these systems and actually emulating what works in a forest or any ecosystem that isn't managed by humans. So that's the second thing, prevention or protection, emulating plants, and then third, creating an ecology of fear. So the ecology of fear is this indirect predation effects of having the presence of predators like this guy. I don't know what his effect is, especially when he looks like this, but the indirect predation effects are the fact that when prey animals know that there are high population of predators in a certain area, they'll avoid that area. It will change their movements, it'll change their behavior. And what we want to do is start creating this ecology of fear for the prey animals in and around our vineyards and orchards. And we can do that by the obvious things, enhancing predator habitat. So owl boxes, raptor boxes, wildlife corridors, hedgerows, watering holes, like wetlands, all the places and spaces that predators need to be happy and thrive in your area. You want to encourage that. Having said that, that alone, and a lot of people think that's great, that we can achieve this natural balance in the ecosystem, does not work, because our time scale for production of a crop, of a wine crop or any other crop, generally speaking, is 1 year. Now, talk about agave. Agave is kind of maybe an out-of-the-box thing where you have 7 years, of a production cycle. And so 1 year isn't going to hang you up, but in almost every other crop, a year is all you get. Now, predator cycles and prey cycles are often much bigger than that. Like the prey will explode in 1 year, but the predators take a year to catch up in their population. And in that gap from when the prey explodes to when the predators catch up in their populations, you can lose half your vineyard or your entire vineyard if you're not taking any action at all. So while a great idea to do all this stuff, because you need those predators ultimately to help create this ecology of fear and to help have balance in the ecosystem, you cannot rely on that alone, because it just doesn't work in the short term for your farming, and you'll lose a lot. But really important. Repellents, now there is a lot of different kinds of repellents. There are kinds of, there's tons of research that's being done on different kinds of herbs and plants and things like that that are undesirable to voles and other rodents. There's something called penergetic that you can look into that's being tested around these things, around vineyards and orchards with rodents, that is supposedly effective as a odor repellent. And there are lots of other things that people use, sort of homeopathic or just, natural, all kinds of natural substances that some people are finding effective. So you can look into that, but that, I would say, definitely don't rely on that in the middle of an infestation, because I've not found them to be effective for more than a day or two in an infestation. Timing is really important. It's great as a preventative, but once you have a big population, they just get so hungry that it doesn't matter. This is a big idea that I think needs to be a bigger idea. It's a big idea for me that nobody's doing. Vineyard guardian dogs and orchard guardian dogs. So we have this obvious thing with sheep. When you're farming sheep in a regenerative system, you always have livestock guardian dogs, because otherwise you're going to lose lambs to coyotes, to mountain lions, to bobcats, to whatever is in your area that's a predator. Like, it would just be silly to put these prey animals out into predator country without a protector. So you create these, these shepherd dogs that care for your flock. You don't create them, you just train them and they grow up with them, and that's just a smart thing to do. Well, I think it should also be thought of as a smart thing to do to create VGDs, vineyard guardian dogs, or OGDs, orchard guardian dogs, that you from a young age train to attack and kill and roam and patrol your vineyard or orchard, and you work with them, and you have them live in that space their whole lives, so that they actually care for your flock of plants, whatever your plants are. They become the protectors of your flock of plants. I just think it makes a lot of sense, and it's something that obviously would take work, like any dog training does, and takes attention and constant working with the dog. If you love dogs, no big deal. There's lots of benefits of working with dogs beyond just them doing their duties, and I think it could be super helpful. I mean, rat terriers are extremely well known, extremely adept if they have a high prey drive at killing small rodents, and they love doing it. So why would we not rely on these historic partnerships with these dogs that actually were bred specifically for this purpose? I just think there needs to be more and more of them in orchard and vineyard country, for this purpose specifically, because they, I think, would do an amazing job. And some cats, this one maybe not, but some cats have a really high prey drive. Yes, I'm talking about you. Some cats have a really high prey drive, and yes, you have to be careful about introducing them into a sensitive ecosystem, because they are indiscriminate. They'll kill reptiles, snakes, birds, obviously, in addition to the rodents. But they are amazing hunters, some of them, not this guy, and they will help create this ecology of fear, and they've been used historically for that purpose. They are really good at what they do. Just be careful about it. I just wouldn't write them off, but you also have to use care with them, because they're indiscriminate. They're not like dogs. Like dogs, literally, you can train them to kill a rat and not a chicken, to kill a vole and not a whatever, and not a not a rabbit. If you're raising rabbits or something like that, you can literally train them to kill specific species of animals. Cats, good luck. And then the final thing with prevention, and again, this is out of the box. I talked about these things, these animals being messengers. Well, the Greek word for angel is messenger, and I like to think of the angel share as like this thing that you give back, in this different way of thinking about our agriculture, where we don't plant a vineyard thinking every one of these grapes is going to be mine, and I have to be precious about it, and I have to hoard it, and I have to make sure that every single one is protected from everything that wants to eat it. Instead, why am I not thinking about planting some for these angels as well? I call this the angel share. It creates just a different mentality when you think about how you can live with abundance rather than fear, how you can, rather than scarcity and fear, love rather than fear. I think about this with my life in general, just like, what am I doing and how much can I give back to you with what I'm doing, rather than how much am I getting for myself? Like, what, in every endeavor, it's like, well, I need to make this, but I also want to give this with that. So we can think of them that way. I mean, one of the out-of-the-box ways that I had this, one of the ideas I had this year, which we never tested, was, what if we irrigated the entire vineyard with just like sprays rather than drip irrigation for the vines? What if we just like broadcast irrigated with sprinklers the entire vineyard to keep it green the entire year, so that these things, the voles, would not need to eat our plants. They would have all this other food, they would have all these other plants that they could eat, and then they would leave our vines alone, or would not hit them as hard, because they might eat one because yes, it's also delicious, but they would have all these other things, so they wouldn't have to only eat those and be focusing so intensely on the only thing that's watered and alive at that time of year. That's definitely an out-of-the-box thing that does create a very different ecology in a landscape that might want a very different ecology from that. So that might be an indication, especially with all the stuff that we're doing. If you have to do all these things to make your plant survive, maybe you go back to my first thing, which is like, are you farming ecologically? Like, should you even be trying to grow these things here if you need to do all these things to manipulate your ecosystem, to protect your vines? Like, maybe it's not the right place to grow vines in that case. But I do like to think about the angel share and how we can give and allow a certain amount of what we would call loss, but actually we don't have to think of it as loss. We can think of it as an intentional gift to the other inhabitants who live here, whose home we're sharing. And I like that. Now, the last thing, so those were all the sort of preventative, or preventative ways of dealing with a vole infestation. And prevention is the best thing. But if you get into a place where populations are already starting to grow and getting a little out of hand, and you're doing all these other things, but it's not stopping them, or you haven't planted your vineyard or orchard with these protections, and you don't have maybe the labor or budget to do a lot of these individual things. It's like every vine has to be painted with sand or protected with a metal vole protector or something like that. Then we can get into these other practices that are disruptive, is what I'm calling disruption. So mowing extensively, so you essentially are going to create a putting green under your vines, super short, down to the dirt. Basically, you want to eliminate any kind of cover. You want to keep it low. You don't want to wait until it gets high and then mow it down, because that creates like a hay or like a mulch, like a dead plant mulch that they can tunnel under and hide under. So you want to keep it short going into the growing season. You also could till, like you can use a clemens, which is a blade that just goes under the vines. Like, that's a minimal thing, but you could disc the interrow as well, the alleys. You could do undervine cultivation with the clemens. You could disc the alleys. This will not only keep the plants low, but it'll disrupt any tunnels that voles make, and some of the tunnels that gophers and squirrels make. It'll basically make it inhospitable for them again, because you keep messing up their home. Sometimes you will kill, as you're doing this, as you're mowing and tilling, you'll kill a few, although it's unintentional. But mostly you'll just be relocating them. They'll be running out, and then they'll come back. And so that's why it's partially useful. It does help in the overall disruption and maybe ecology of fear, because they create this inhospitable place for them to stay. Not 100% effective though, but effective in concert with some of these other things. And then the other kind of disruption, which is maybe also a version of prevention, is rotating your pasture-raised poultry and pigs through your vineyard, in addition to sheep or whatever else you're grazing in your vines. Poultry and pigs are omnivores, and they will opportunistically eat voles and mice and sometimes other baby gophers and squirrels and things like that. So having them in your vineyard actually helps with this ecology of fear, because they will peck and eat, and they'll scratch and dig as well. They'll dig up tunnels where voles are. Pigs will root and dig up the earth around. They're almost like tillers, natural tillers For that reason, of course, they have to be managed carefully when in your vineyard, especially if it's a young vineyard that you're trying to establish. You don't want them to harm your vines. They can do just as much damage as a gopher or a squirrel can, although more of a squirrel. Gophers will actually eat the roots. I don't know, you probably don't have to worry so much about that with the poultry and the pigs, but you do have to worry about them harming young roots and young vines from digging. So you have to manage those carefully. So those are the basics right there. And if you can implement them all, it will be much better for you. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me at connect@organicwinepodcast.com. We also have the Beyond Organic Wine Google group, all one word, Beyond Organic Wine. If you search for it in your Google groups and ask to join, we have a whole thread about Vole Infestation there. And I wish you the very best if you do, because it's brutal and I feel it, and I hope this has helped.